to lead this huge army out onto the steppe, to edge of the steppe at least, to confront the Mongols. And this army was defeated, wiped out. The emperor was captured. The Mongols kind of briefly laid siege to Beijing.
Dr. Graff, is there anything that stands out about the Ming Dynasty's military power and prowess?
Okay. Yeah, I am much less of an expert on the Ming than the Tang. So,
Okay.
but certainly the um, Ming Dynasty, for the most part, was kind of much less expansive than some earlier dynasties like the Han and the Tang. So the Ming never really expanded to dominate territory in Central Asia, and it was not really able to establish any kind of lasting sort of hegemony over the steppe territories to the north. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of differed from Han and Tang there. So
It
um, it
did.
was it was
Did
general. I mean, for the most part, more defensively inclined than
I think that's going to answer
great.
one of my questions. They built, well, they didn't build, they rebuilt, they sort of retrofitted, if you will, upgraded the Chinese wall that was there for some time. Um, was that an overreaction, an emotional overreaction to Mongols' prior centuries' conquest of China?
Um, I, I I wouldn't argue that it wasn't, or that wasn't an element there.
I
Um,
see.
but again, there, I think wall building tended was more mid and late Ming than early Ming. So we're talking kind of more, certain periods in the kind of mid 1400s and into the 1500s. So the sections of wall that tourists see around Beijing, you
Hmm.
know, are bottling and all that was that's 16th century work, and to the I mean, before it was repaired by the current government, it was.
Interesting. So
It's,
is there a significance to the fact that the wall building came in the mid and late Ming
yeah,
period?
certainly, because they were certainly more the Ming was at its most confident and expansive in its early period, and
I
felt
see.
least threatened. So that was when the Ming was launching, say in the late 1300s, cavalry offensives into the Mongolian steppes, to keep the Mongols off balance.
Were the Mongols still a threat to the Ming?
Yes. Yeah, and
Okay,
yeah, and again, the Mongols were definitely on their rear foot in the late 1300s, early 1400s, after having been expelled from China. But they recovered in the 1400s and the 1500s, and one measure of the extent of the recovery is the Tu Mu incident that occurred in 1449, where the then Ming emperor was persuaded to lead a large army. That is, some sources claim it was as large as 500,000 men, which
wow.
I am personally very dubious about that, but I'm again,
Okay.
not a Ming expert. To lead this huge army out onto the steppe, to edge of the steppe at least, to confront the Mongols. And this army was defeated, wiped out. The emperor was captured. The Mongols kind of briefly laid siege to Beijing.
Oh my goodness, this is
Didn't capture the capital, but this was, and they had to shuffle a different member of the imperial family, the Jew family, onto the throne because the emperor had been captured.
oh my
So
God. Based on this, the Mongols were quite
yeah,
powerful.
yes, yeah, and so this goes a long way to explain kind of why the voyaging the early Ming stopped. And
Oh, you're talking about the treasure ships.
yes, yeah. So that they had much more urgent problems much closer to home, and sending out treasure fleets began to appear a luxury that the empire could not afford.
Oh, interesting. Here they are, expending all these resources on these gigantic treasure ships. Now, I've read a lot about the treasure ships. Some of them exaggerated, others probably more factually based, if you will. Um, from what I gather is that Europe at the time didn't have any naval power that could compare to these treasure ships. How true is that?
Um, Basically, it's true.
Oh,
There's that in the um, we're talking about the early 1400s,
yeah.
and this is the time when the Portuguese, Henry the Navigator, just kind of slowly starting to feel their way, kind of mile by mile, along down the coast of West Africa.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right,
And it's
past
almost like 90
Morocco and
years.
Mauritania down to Senegal, and
Exactly, exactly. And it's decades, 80, 90 years before Columbus.
right, and they're sending few ships and small, and certainly naval warfare was not unknown in Europe, say with the experience of France and England during the Hundred Years' War, with all the
Yeah.
galley fighting in the Mediterranean. Um, but but you know, no European state could build a fleet of that size, nor could
Wow.
any of the European states send a fleet of that size or any size in the early 1400s so far away. So the
Wow.
Ming really had the field to themselves at that point.
What happened to those ships? Were they just abandoned, burnt,
Yeah,
or?
they were basically mothballed and allowed to rot away eventually.
Oh, interesting. Just two follow-up questions on the Ming. One is, did they have a permanent class of soldiers?
Yes, they did, but it was an
By
interesting.
class, is that like societal class? Is that it?
Yeah, it was, but that they had military households at the beginning of the Ming Dynasty. Certain families were designated as military households, and members of those families had a military obligation, and members of other families, you were either Bing or Min, and if you were Bing, you had a military obligation, your household, and if you were Min, who were the vast majority of the population, you didn't. And then
These were surnames, or they're just categories?
their classifications
I
of
see.
whether
Okay.
you're military or civilian household.
So being in the Bing
It's a
group,
Bing, Bing, and then the alternative is Min, Min.
was that a coveted classification to have?
No.
No.
And again, not being a Ming expert, I can't go into all the details, but
Yeah,
as this developed over time, that the military status was rather burdensome. That say
burdensome.
military commanders would put their kind of hereditary subordinates to work kind of as if they were household servants or serfs,
Oh
and put
boy.
them to work on their estates and so forth.
Oh boy.
So
Just last question about Ming before we move on. Did they use gunpowder by then?
yes, they did. So the Ming, by the Ming, it's like fully gunpowder is fully weaponized, and you have kind of real cannon being used from the very beginning of the Ming Dynasty, and you
And
see
that didn't stop the threat of the Mongols.
no, and
Yeah.
to um, going going to here mention an argument made by a good friend of mine, Ken Chase, who wrote a book about gunpowder in world history. Um, uh, but the gunpowder weaponry is especially early gunpowder weaponry is not all that useful for fighting against nomads.
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
Cannon are heavy, hard to drag around. They slow you down. Handheld firearms have very little range and or accuracy. They have less range or accuracy than a composite bow.
Oh, I see. Especially against the cavalry that is moving
Right.
so
So
fast.
you're like a bunch of musketeers with primitive handguns marching on foot. Meanwhile, the nomads who have a much better weapon system than you still are running circles around you.
No, that's
And where the
interesting.
gunpowder weapons are useful is defending static positions, like fortresses, like segments of the Great Wall, like that. And this may help to explain why the Mongols could encircle Beijing from time to time, but they couldn't take it.
They could also probably be helpful for siege as siege weapons for
Yes,
bombarding a
exactly.
wall.
Right.
We'll be back after a short break to talk about the Qing Dynasty, the arrival of the West, and the Opium Wars. We'll be right back.